There are moments when you look at a person and think, I cannot do this anymore. Maybe they have disappointed you. Maybe they keep making the same mistakes. Maybe they have become distant, difficult, unpredictable, or emotionally exhausted. And after giving them chance after chance, something inside you says, enough. Walk away. But before you make that decision, I want you to consider something deeper. What if the very person you see as a burden is actually revealing something God wants to develop in you? We often assume that the purpose of relationships is to make us comfortable. We want people who understand us, support us, encourage us, and fit neatly into the life we have designed. And when someone becomes difficult, we immediately interpret difficulty as evidence that the relationship has lost its purpose. But difficulty and meaning are not opposites. In fact, some of the most important growth in human life happens precisely where comfort ends. Think about patience. You cannot develop genuine patience when everything goes according to your expectations. You develop patience when someone frustrates you. You develop compassion when someone fails. You develop forgiveness when someone gives you a reason to hold a grudge. You develop emotional strength when circumstances challenge your desire to control everything. That does not mean every difficult person is meant to remain in your life forever. It means you should be careful about assuming that every difficult season is meaningless. Sometimes God uses another person's weakness to expose the areas where you still need to grow. Perhaps this person is teaching you that love is more than emotion. Love is a decision to see the human being beneath the behavior. It is the ability to say, I recognize what you are doing, but I also recognize that you are more than the worst thing you have done. That is a powerful psychological shift. When we reduce a person to their mistakes, we stop seeing possibility. We create a fixed identity. That's just who they are. But human beings are rarely that simple. People change, people mature, people heal, people awaken. People can spend years living beneath their potential and then, through one profound realization, begin moving in an entirely different direction. You may be looking at someone's present while God is looking at their potential, and that difference matters. Imagine judging a seed because it does not look like a tree. You would never do that. You understand that the seed contains something that cannot yet be seen. Yet we often judge people the same way. We see their current condition and assume it is their final condition. But what if it isn't? What if the person who is struggling today is not the person they will become tomorrow? What if their silence is not rejection, but confusion? What if their anger is covering pain? What if their distance is connected to wounds they have never learned to articulate? What if their mistakes are symptoms of an internal battle you cannot see? Again, this does not excuse destructive behavior. Compassion should never require blindness. But understanding someone is different from approving everything they do. You can hold someone accountable and still believe they can change. You can establish boundaries and still pray for them. You can step back and still refuse to hate them. And sometimes you can remain present long enough to witness a transformation that would never have happened if everyone had abandoned them at their lowest point. That is why you should not make a permanent judgment about a person based on a temporary chapter. Ask yourself, what is this relationship teaching me? What is this situation revealing about my character? Am I being asked to walk away, or am I simply being asked to love with greater wisdom? Those are very different questions, because sometimes the test is not whether you can find someone easier to love. Sometimes the test is whether you can become the kind of person who knows how to love wisely when loving becomes difficult. So before you give up, pause, pray, think, look beyond the behavior and consider the person. Look beyond the present moment and consider the possibility of transformation. Because what you call a burden today may be the very situation through which God is teaching you patience, discernment, courage, and unconditional compassion. Don't give up on the person simply because you cannot yet see who they are becoming. And this brings us to something most people struggle to understand. We often confuse a person's current condition with their permanent identity. You look at what they are doing right now, and you decide that this is who they are. They are angry, so you call them an angry person. They are confused, so you call them lost. They failed, so you call them a failure. They made terrible decisions, so you assume they will always make terrible decisions. But that is not how transformation works. A chapter is not a biography, a season is not an identity, and a mistake is not a destiny. Think about your own life for a moment. If someone had judged you solely by your worst day, would they have understood you? If someone had taken one painful decision you made years ago and used it as the definition of your entire character, would that have been fair? Probably not. Because you know something about yourself that other people cannot always see, you are still becoming. And so is that person. This is where faith gives us a different perspective. Faith teaches us to look beyond what is visible. It asks us to recognize that human potential is often hidden beneath weakness, confusion, fear, and failure. The person you are frustrated with may not be the person they are capable of becoming. They may simply be trapped in a pattern they have not yet learned how to break. They may be carrying pain they have never processed. They may have spent years protecting themselves and no longer know how to trust. They may have learned survival when they should have learned connection. And when people are wounded, they do not always behave like people who are healed. That does not make harmful behavior acceptable, but it gives you the ability to distinguish between condemnation and understanding. There is a tremendous difference between saying, "This behavior is wrong," and saying, "This person is beyond redemption." The first statement recognizes responsibility, the second denies possibility. And you have to be careful about denying someone the possibility of change simply because you have not witnessed it yet. Human beings are remarkably capable of transformation. One decision can change a direction. One realization can break a pattern. One moment of honesty can begin years of healing. One encounter with truth can force someone to reconsider everything they thought they knew about themselves. Sometimes transformation begins quietly. There may be no dramatic announcement, no public apology, no immediate evidence. Someone may simply begin questioning their old behavior. They may start feeling uncomfortable with the person they have been. They may become aware of the damage they have caused. They may begin searching for something deeper. And that internal shift can be the beginning of an entirely different life. This is why you must learn to separate someone's present behavior from their ultimate potential. A person can be lost without being hopeless. A person can be broken without being permanently destroyed. A person can make terrible choices without being permanently defined by those choices. And perhaps the most important question is not, who are they right now? Perhaps the better question is, who could they become if they finally confront what is keeping them trapped? That question changes everything. Because when you believe transformation is possible, you stop looking at people only through the lens of disappointment. You begin looking at them through the lens of possibility. But there is wisdom required here. Believing in someone's potential does not mean chasing them endlessly. It does not mean tolerating disrespect. It does not mean allowing someone to repeatedly hurt you while you call it faith. Sometimes believing in someone means stepping back and allowing them to experience the consequences of their choices. Sometimes love says, "I will not participate in your destruction, but I will never stop believing that you can become better." That is mature compassion. You do not have to rescue someone to believe in them. You do not have to carry their entire burden to care about their future. And you certainly do not have to destroy yourself trying to save someone who refuses to change. Your responsibility is to respond with wisdom. If God has placed this person on your heart, perhaps the question is not simply whether they deserve another chance. Perhaps the question is whether you can see them as God sees them, not merely as they are today, but as someone still capable of becoming something greater. Because sometimes the greatest mistake we make is judging the unfinished story as though it were the final page. So don't confuse their struggle with their identity. Don't confuse their failure with their future. And don't confuse the person they have been with the person they may still become. Never mistake a person's lowest chapter for the final sentence of their story. And once you understand that a person's present struggle does not necessarily define their future, you begin to see relationships differently. You start asking a deeper question: why is this person in my life at all? Because not every meaningful relationship is designed to make your life easier. Some people enter your life and bring immediate comfort. Others bring questions. Some make you feel understood. Others expose parts of yourself you did not know were there. And sometimes, the people who challenge you the most become the people through whom you learn the most about yourself. We naturally prefer relationships that confirm what we already believe. We like people who agree with us, understand our perspective, and make us feel secure. But growth rarely happens when everything around us simply confirms who we already are. Growth happens when something challenges us. Think about the person who tests your patience. Why does their behavior affect you so deeply? What is it touching inside you? Is it your need for control, your fear of rejection, your expectation that people should behave according to your standards, your desire to be understood without having to explain yourself? Sometimes another person becomes a mirror. And mirrors are not always comfortable. They show us what we would rather ignore. This is one reason certain relationships feel so significant. They force us to confront ourselves. They reveal our strengths, but they also expose our unfinished work. They teach us that love is not simply about receiving what we want from another person. It is also about becoming someone capable of giving wisely. And perhaps that is why God sometimes allows unexpected people to cross our path. You may have wondered, why this person? Why now? Why did I have to meet them? You may never receive an immediate answer. But purpose does not always announce itself at the beginning. Sometimes you understand the meaning of an experience only after you have lived through it. Think about how many moments in your own life seemed insignificant when they happened, only to become important later. A conversation you almost ignored, a person you almost never met, a disappointment that redirected your life, a closed door that eventually protected you from something you could not see. We are often impatient with the timing of meaning. We want to know immediately why something is happening, but life rarely works that way. There are seasons when you are given the experience before you are given the explanation, and this is where faith becomes essential. Faith does not require you to understand everything. It requires you to trust that what you cannot currently understand does not necessarily mean that nothing meaningful is happening. Perhaps this person is in your life to teach you patience. Perhaps they are teaching you discernment. Perhaps they are forcing you to develop boundaries. Perhaps they are helping you discover compassion. Perhaps you are meant to encourage them during a season when they have lost confidence in themselves. Or perhaps your relationship with them will eventually lead both of you toward a direction neither of you could have predicted. You don't always know the purpose while you're standing inside the process. That is why you should be careful about making decisions purely from emotional exhaustion. Sometimes we say, I don't understand why this is happening, so it must be wrong. But confusion is not always confirmation that something should end. Sometimes confusion simply means you do not have the complete picture yet. Now, this does not mean you should force every relationship to survive. Wisdom still matters. Discernment still matters. There are relationships that must end, doors that must close, and situations from which you must walk away. But before you make that decision, ask yourself one honest question. What is this relationship producing in me? Is it making you more patient, more honest, more courageous, more compassionate, more dependent on God? Or is it consistently destroying your peace, your dignity, your values, and your ability to live well? The answer matters, because sometimes God uses a person by keeping them close, and sometimes God uses a person by teaching you when to let go. The purpose is not always the relationship itself. Sometimes the purpose is what the relationship is developing inside you. So don't be obsessed with understanding why this person appeared in your life. Instead, pay attention to what their presence is teaching you. Because one day you may look back and realize that the person you once considered an interruption was actually part of the education God was giving your soul. And perhaps you were never meant to understand the purpose immediately. Sometimes God gives you the person first and the reason later. And once you begin to understand that a person's struggle may have a purpose beyond what you can immediately see, you also begin to recognize something else. Your presence in someone's life may matter far more than you realize. We live in a world that celebrates dramatic actions. We think impact has to be visible. We imagine that changing someone's life requires a grand speech, a major sacrifice, or some extraordinary moment that everyone remembers. But human beings are often changed by much smaller things: a conversation, a kind word, a message at the right moment, a person who refuses to judge them by their worst mistake. Sometimes what saves a person from completely giving up is simply knowing that someone still believes they are worth saving. Think about how powerful that is. There are people walking around today who appear completely fine. They go to work, they smile, they answer questions, they participate in conversations. From the outside, nothing seems wrong. But internally, they may be fighting a battle nobody knows about. They may be questioning their worth. They may be afraid of failing again. They may be carrying regret from something they cannot forgive themselves for. They may have reached a point where they no longer expect anything good from their future. And then you show up, not with a perfect solution, not with all the answers. You simply show them that they are still seen. That can matter more than you think. Psychologically, human beings need connection. We need evidence that we belong somewhere, that our existence has meaning, and that we are not completely alone in our struggles. When someone is convinced that nobody cares, even a small act of genuine concern can challenge that belief. You may never know what your words did for someone. You may say something casually and forget it 5 minutes later, while that person carries it for years. You may tell someone, "I believe you can do better," and they may remember those words on the night they are tempted to quit. You may remind someone of their strength when they have forgotten it themselves. You may listen when everyone else is giving advice. You may simply remain calm when someone expects you to abandon them. These things seem small, but small things repeated at the right moment can become powerful forces of transformation. And this is where we have to rethink what it means to help someone. Helping does not always mean fixing. Sometimes helping means witnessing. Sometimes it means saying, "I don't have the solution, but I'm willing to sit with you while you find it." There is enormous strength in that kind of presence, because when you try to fix everyone, you eventually become exhausted. You begin carrying responsibilities that were never yours. You start believing that someone's healing depends entirely on you. It doesn't. You cannot change another person's heart for them. You cannot make someone choose wisdom. You cannot force someone to heal. But you can create an environment where honesty becomes possible. You can speak truth without humiliation. You can offer encouragement without enabling destructive behavior. You can remind someone of their worth without pretending their mistakes don't matter. That is the balance between compassion and wisdom. And perhaps there is someone in your life right now who does not need another lecture. They need someone who can see beyond their behavior. They need someone who can say, "I know you've made mistakes, but I don't believe your mistakes are the whole story." Imagine what that could do to a person's mind. Imagine what happens when someone who has spent years believing they are worthless finally encounters a person who refuses to treat them as worthless. Something begins to shift, not necessarily instantly, not necessarily dramatically, but internally. A seed of possibility is planted, and sometimes that is all a person needs to begin moving again. Now be careful. Being present for someone does not mean sacrificing yourself endlessly. You can care without becoming consumed. You can encourage without becoming responsible for their choices. You can love someone while maintaining healthy boundaries. Your role may simply be to provide one piece of encouragement in a much larger journey. And maybe that is exactly why you crossed paths. Maybe you were not sent to rescue this person. Maybe you were sent to remind them that they are not forgotten. Maybe your presence is not the destination. Maybe it is the bridge. So don't underestimate the quiet power of showing up. You may never receive credit. You may never know the full impact. You may never see the moment when everything changes. But if your presence gives someone enough hope to take one more step, then your presence mattered. Never underestimate what one faithful person can awaken in another.